Well, welcome back to yet another John Birch Society webinar. This time we're going to be tackling the subject global attack on farmers. There's a global attack on farmers, and no one can get into this subject and present it as well as our speaker, Rebecca Terrell. Rebecca Terrell, she was also a nurse, and she is the senior editor and contributor to the New American Magazine. And you know that bill that she authored for Congressman Ron Paul, the American Sovereignty Restoration Act? Yes, that was her. HR 1146. What that act did, it aimed to end U.S. membership in the United Nations. And she's done a lot of other things, but we want her to get into her subject. Before we do that, let's go ahead and go before the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for yet another day that you've gathered us here together, Lord, to learn because education, Lord, is very important to you. Education is important to us. And also, Lord, we want the truth, Lord, to be seen in this presentation as well. Be with our speaker and be with the guests in Jesus' name. And if we could just go ahead and pull up the flag so that we can say the Pledge of Allegiance. I'll go ahead and turn my camera off. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. God bless you, Rebecca Terrell. I'm so thankful that you are here. And folks, make sure that you stay all the way through because we have a surprise for you. Rebecca, please take it away.
Oh, thank you, CJ. I appreciate that. Well, I am going to share my screen here so everybody can see my PowerPoint. Oh, goodness. I don't know that. CJ, somebody's going to have to tell me if what y'all can see to make sure. I'm
No
just going to go
problem,
ahead
but
and
we see it
play
right
this
there.
now. Do you see it now?
Sure do.
Okay, great. Perfect. Um, Here we go. All right. Well, I want to warn everybody, I've been told that this is a very depressing presentation, and I'm not doing it to depress you. It's better to be forewarned and forearmed, right? And that's what we're doing here. There is a happy ending, though. There's always a happy ending when God's involved, and we absolutely put our full trust in Him. We work as if it's all up to us and pray as if it's all up to Him. That's the best advice I've ever heard. So we know that right now, what's happening, these Hunger Games that our government is pulling on us, it's nothing new. We're going to go through that and show the pattern throughout history. And we've got to get over this kind of childish notion that we live in a free country right now. In a way we do, and in a way we don't. They're very much trying to take us over. But what we're seeing right now is Agenda 2030 in action on the ground. And we're going to get into how they have kind of put it in under the table and how they're using it. Now, anybody who in the audience who maybe is not familiar with Agenda 2030, UN spokeswoman Heidi Beirich back in 2020 told AFP Fact Check that the claim that the United Nations is attempting to control people through Agenda 2030 is just a false attempt to paint sensible plans for sustainable development as some sort of communist plan, which she said, of course, it's not. Now, mainstreamers consider her to be a superstar debunker since she penned her magnum opus in 2014. It was called Agenda 21, the UN Sustainability and Right-Wing Conspiracy Theory. Of course, it was published by the Southern Poverty Law Center, so need we say more? But the JBS, the John Birch Society, was figured heavily in her screed there. Now, Agenda 21 is this master plan, which includes Agenda 2030, and it's been signed by all 193 UN member states. Now, like I said, the John Birch Society is a principal villain in her 2014 expose. Beirich wrote this: Agenda 21 has been transformed in much of the American public mind into a secret plot to impose totalitarian world government, a nefarious effort to crush freedom in the name of environmentalism. And she blamed Birchers for this transformation. And of course, we proudly take credit for that. But Byrick's reply reads with all the maturity of a playground retort. Agenda 2030 is a feel-good guide that cannot force anyone anywhere to do anything at all. The faceless, unelected bureaucrats who crafted it and its equal Agenda 2030 simply want to make the world a better place, so she says. Now, historical precedent belies her claims, of course. Governments unfailingly tend toward tyranny, not beneficence. We have to be realistic when we look at history and our place in it. We're not some special people who have broken the mold, right? Now, controlling people by controlling resources is the oldest trick in the dictator's book. Siege warfare and blockades are the most primitive examples. And another age-old military tactic is what is called scorched earth, where armies obliterate crops and irrigation systems to starve entire populations into submission. Now, conquerors never pretend that their goal for the defeated is freedom. On the contrary, the acquisition of territory, enslavement of populations, and accumulation of wealth are their aims. However, wars can be costly, and as the Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu wrote in his time-honored treatise, The Art of War, the supreme method is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So, as time went on, techniques of domination became increasingly shrewd and sinister. Now, history abounds with examples, but I'm going to focus in on one that's going to play a role in what we're seeing today. England's conquest of Ireland. It began with King Henry VIII's 1542 Act of Supremacy, declaring himself sovereign over Ireland by the stroke of a pen. The next 100 years witnessed legalized theft of Irish plantations and led to Oliver Cromwell's military conquest of the Emerald Isle in 1652. They used famine and land dispossession. Those were two of the central tenets to Cromwell's campaign. Now, next came the Popery Acts of 1704 and 1709, when Parliament restricted Catholics' property ownership, using religion as a cover for more massive theft of real estate and turning Ireland into a country of absentee English landowners and Irish tenant farmers. Pay attention to that, because that's a big tactic in all of this. An absentee landowner, tenant farmers. The situation spelled doom for the nation when blight hit the potato crops in 1845 and 1846, and massive famine ensued. Landowners didn't live there, so they cared little for the plight of the starving. However, people starved because of government policies, not because of potato blight. Potatoes weren't the only thing grown there. First, the Crown restricted grain imports into Ireland and then enforced Irish exports to Britain to continue uninterrupted. And then it required Irishmen who received government aid to give up their farms, another big land grab. According to Griffith's valuation, which was a land survey completed in 1868, only 3% of Irish farmers were landowners, and less than 2% of landowners owned more than 1/3 of the farm acreage. Roughly a quarter of Ireland's population fled this tyranny, many immigrating to the United States. So that was back at the time when Staten Island, you see all the Irish immigrants there. Now you'll notice in that map that's on the screen, the green areas, Cork, Dublin, and Belfast, those were the only places where the population grew. And just keep this map in mind, because we're going to be talking about 15-minute cities later. This is the way they get people off of the land and into the cities. Okay, they formulate these concocted famines. Now, would those Irish immigrants cringe today knowing how much of their adopted country is owned by the federal government and foreign entities and absentee landlords? We certainly should, considering how vulnerable our food supplies are on this account. The statistics actually are very grim. According to the United States Department of Agriculture, the federal government currently manages about 28% of the total land area in the country. That's more than a quarter. And while only 20% of the agricultural acreage is owned and operated by individuals or private partnerships. Of course, those labor under such grueling regulations that they have many parallels with the Irish tenant farmers of old. Now, additionally, though the amount of farmland has held relatively steady during the past century, the number of farms has plummeted from a high of nearly 7 million in the 1940s to only 2 million today, while the average farm size increased nearly threefold. 3% of domestic farms now make up 47%, or almost half of the value of production. Now, as for infrastructure, the University of Illinois researched the US food supply chain in 2019 to find that only 9 counties, not states, counties in the United States, are most central to the overall structure of the food supply network. You'll see the marks there in red, and I'm actually that little bitty red one in Tennessee. That's where I am. A disruption of any of these counties could affect the entire country. And of course, COVID exposed some of our vulnerability. Moreover, Oxfam reports that only 10 companies, and they're listed there on the graphic, they control almost every large food and beverage brand in the world. Now, has this happened by accident, or could the US government be repeating history? I think you know that's a rhetorical question, but a brief glance at the past 250 years makes the answer very painfully evident. Now, in America's colonial days, more than 95% of the population earned a living by farming. And that's a historical estimate. Moreover, people of that day knew Ireland's sad story of British oppression. The Crown had pulled the same stunts in the 17th and 18th centuries in its takeover of India, largely driven by the desire to establish a monopoly in the opium trade. With government endorsement, the British East India Company coerced local farmers to grow poppies instead of sustenance crops, often through forced labor or debt bondage. And famine and widespread poverty, of course, ensued, and India fell to British rule. Now, America boasted plentiful natural resources too, and her pioneers did not want to become another statistic of British colonial rule. She won her independence in 1784, and for more than half a century, her farmers enjoyed the fruits of their labor relatively unfettered by government interference. The executive branch operated only 5 cabinet departments and 9 major agencies until 1849, which was a very pivotal year during the very short-lived administration of President Taylor. Enter the Department of the Interior, which was established not merely to manage federal lands, which of course the General Land Office had been doing since 1812. You know, they had the Louisiana Purchase and they wanted to encourage westward expansion. So it was here are your land grants. The Land Office had been doing fine with that. No, the Department of Interior was also established to manage resources on federal lands. Very important distinction. So you're talking about forests, minerals, water, land use. You see how that's this huge step. It's not just changing the name of an agency, it's changing its whole telos, right? Then, during the first Republican administration, interestingly enough, the floodgates opened. President Abraham Lincoln spearheaded corporate welfare by founding the USDA in 1862. Now, this fledgling agency was authorized to advance, and this is a quote from the bill he signed, advance agriculture, rural development, aquaculture, and human nutrition in the most general and comprehensive sense of those terms. Now, as if to cover all the bases, during the same year, Lincoln also signed into law the Morrill Land Grant College Act, which marks the first federal foray into higher education and would soon provide an army of intellectuals there to justify the government encroachment. He also signed the Homestead Act, which was ostensibly to promote westward pioneer expansion. Of course, that had already been going on, but this was exploited by wealthy landowners wealthy investors to acquire vast tracts of land. And then, of course, he signed the Second Confiscation Act, which built upon the first, passed the year prior to this, to seize land and property from Confederates. Now, these measures may not seem So outlandish to us today, but imagine how dictatorial they seemed to countrymen who until then had been relatively unfettered by federal usurpations. It's supremely ironic that the destructive legislation of 1862, passed during a war fought supposedly to free the enslaved, planted the seeds of government oppression of the citizens of the United States, just as her big sister had done to Ireland a century before. Indeed, the last half of the 19th century saw the birth of 19 major agencies. 25 more were added in the 20th century prior to the catastrophic administration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Each bureau unconstitutionally expanded, government overreach, robbing states of their sovereignty, and establishing federal control over currency, education, commerce, transportation, industry, labor, and many other areas, but none more than land and agriculture. The highlighted agencies there specifically had to do with land and agriculture. For example, the Forest Reserve Act of 1891 established national forests to prevent private development and manipulate water resources. The Interstate Commerce Commission, which is the granddaddy of them all, founded in 1887. It's insane how far back this stuff goes. Now, this was supposedly to protect the little guy from high fares charged by railroads, but it actually resulted in artificially high transportation costs that favored railroad monopolies and large enterprises over the small regional rail lines. The 1916 Federal Farm Loan Act effectively created debt bondage for America's farmers in the years leading up to the government-induced Great Depression, when bankruptcies and foreclosures caused widespread loss of private property. Likewise, the 1929 Farm Stabilization Act authorized the government to buy and store 257 million bushels of wheat. Now, supposedly, the farmers were overproducing and flooding the post-World War I domestic market, causing grain prices to plummet. The real reason was, you guessed it, government interference. All industries across the nation were losing profit because public buying power was eroded by government control of the money supply and centralized bank credit expansion brought on in 1913 by the new Federal Reserve System. That's not a federal agency. That is a private banking cartel that literally took our gold and gave us paper in return. Officials waited until the winter of 1931 and 1932 to dump all that wheat they'd stored in 1929 on the market, driving prices to their lowest in history and bankrupting those so-called overproducing farmers in the middle of the Great Depression. So that's when FDR arrived on the scene with his New Deal. But it wasn't new. FDR took all of his cues from the age-old tyrant's playbook. The only difference was that his series of programs and regulations put federal conquest of the states into overdrive. In the span of just 5 years, he launched more than 100 distinct agencies and initiatives, and he opened the door wide for international hucksters to wreak havoc on our nation. His Agricultural Adjustment Act of 1933 was enacted supposedly, again, to alleviate conditions during the national economic emergency. But believe it or not, that national economic emergency is still going on because, and it hasn't expired, because you know it today as the ever-present Farm Bill, which is updated every 5 years or so. So this bill created the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. That agency immediately became the nest of the Ware Cell, which was named for Harold Ware. He was a Communist Party member and one of many such adherents who was recruited for FDR's New Deal agencies. Their story is told in Dan Van Gorder's 1966 book, Ill Fares the Land, the famine planned for America. Ware Cell members had been trained to conduct espionage and influence U.S. policy regarding labor and agriculture. Ware himself had helped Lenin set up forced farm collectives in the Soviet Union following the Russian famine of 1921. That catastrophe came about not by act of God, once again, but because the Bolshevik Revolution destroyed agricultural production and infrastructure while imposing grain requisitions for the military and elites. Kind of sounds like Britain and Ireland, doesn't it? Americans like banker Jacob Schiff and mining magnate William Boyce Thompson financed this concocted famine, as detailed in James Perloff's 1988 book, Shadows of Power. Historians estimate as many as 5 million people perished during that catastrophe. Now, another well-known Wear Cell member was Alger Hiss, who would later serve as the Secretary General of the United States delegation at the 1945 founding of the United Nations in San Francisco. 5 years after that, America learned that the whole time he had been a communist spy. He was convicted on 2 counts of perjury for denying espionage and passing government documents to Soviet officials. Now, Ware and Hiss were among the bureaucrats back in 1929 who came up with that idea of blaming American farmers for low agricultural prices following the First World War. Their AAA answer in 1933 was to repeat the swindle of the Farm Stabilization Act, buying up all the so-called surplus and paying farmers to halt production. The truth was that the domestic demand far outpaced supply, as Van Gorder documents in his book. To fill that demand, officials arranged for low-cost foreign goods to replace the missing domestic product. Roosevelt got around protective tariffs, which were in place at the time, by signing the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act of 1934, which gave the president authority to negotiate bilateral trade agreements and lower tariffs without congressional approval. Unprecedented in the country's history. Thus began America's dependence on imports and her domestic vulnerability to adverse weather conditions, as borne out in the Dust Bowls in the 1930s. Now, in 1936, the U.S. Supreme Court nearly stopped this trajectory in its tracks. SCOTUS struck down key parts of the Agricultural Adjustment Act as unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the victory was short-lived because in 1938, Congress passed a new and even worse AAA, introducing mandatory crop quotas and expanded subsidies to pay farmers to reduce production. Ohio farmer Roscoe Filburn found himself in the crosshairs when he planted roughly double his quota of wheat. Listen to these numbers: 23 acres instead of 11. That's nothing on a farm. The government fined him, so Filburn sued, arguing that the extra wheat was not for sale, but was for personal use on his farm. SCOTUS ruled unanimously against him, claiming authority under the Commerce Clause of the United States Constitution. So, well, by the time this ruling was handed down in 1942, Roosevelt had packed the court with New Deal liberals. So that explains that ruling. The court said that by growing his own wheat, Filburn reduced the amount he needed to purchase, thereby affecting interstate commerce. It's unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. The ruling meant that government could suddenly regulate self-sufficiency on any farm. Wickard versus Filburn is considered a landmark case that greatly cemented federal power over agriculture. For as Justice Robert H. Jackson arrogantly wrote in his ruling, it is hardly lack of due process for the government to regulate that which it subsidizes. The narcissism of these people. Now, since then, federal control of agriculture has only expanded, as we all know, pushing global rather than national interests. That's not by accident. In 1949, 4 years after the U.S. joined the UN, President Harry Truman initiated the International Wheat Agreement, predecessor to the modern International Grains Council, which is a government cartel that regulates the production, price, and distribution of wheat among its member nations. Today, it's ironically headquartered in London. Imagine that. The home of history's most proficient experts in land-grabbing tactics. After Truman was president, Dwight Eisenhower's USDA Food for Peace program in 1954, which was a foreign aid program that shipped our sustenance even to nations hostile to the United States. Through the Agency for International Development, also founded in 1954, foreign aid took on the Feed the World focus that now amounts to billions of US tax dollars every single year. Meanwhile, Eisenhower's wheat police were terrorizing American farmers. They could invade any farm in the nation and conduct warrantless searches and determine compliance with quotas and acreage allotments. Violators were fined and even imprisoned without trial. Within the first year, USDA fined 14,000 American farmers more than $8.5 million, which is equivalent in 2025 dollars to 94 million. Time magazine of March 9th, 1959 told the story of Michigan farmer Stanley Yankus, who was fined $4,562 or nearly $50,000 in our money today for raising wheat to feed his chickens. He told the House Agricultural Committee, quote, "I am not fighting for the right to grow wheat. I am fighting for the right to own property. If I'm forbidden to use my land, then I do not own it." Now, that wheat police reign of terror ended due to public outcry such as his. But even then, USDA relaxed restrictions only to allow small farmers to grow up to 30 acres of wheat for their own use. And meanwhile, SCOTUS continually refused to hear cases challenging the constitutionality of USDA programs. Now, recent decades have witnessed further federal expansion. The late 1950s saw the Soil Bank, predecessor to today's Conservation Reserve Program, paying farmers to leave their fields fallow as Congress hypocritically dammed the Colorado River to cultivate high arid land in northern Arizona and southern Utah, never before farmed. And of course, then when the fish get endangered in those areas of desert that aren't supposed to have fish anyway, they use environmentalism to grab even more land and more of our rights. Commodity price fixing in the 1960s and 70s wreaked havoc on agricultural economy and food prices as USDA enforced unionism on American farmers and ranchers, which further undermined food security. Unionism makes no sense on a ranch or a farm that are so driven by the seasons. Even the Reagan deregulation era in the 1980s completely ignored agriculture. Today, the Farm Bill, which was originally the Agricultural Adjustment Act, is updated every 5 years, holding farmers in check while bolstering a legalized racketeering system for corporate interests. Throughout the past 22 years, the largest and wealthiest farms have always received the most subsidies. And this is a quote from the Environmental Working Group, which reported on this in 2023. Between 1995 and 2021, that was the data they were looking at, federal farm handouts totaled $478 billion. 78% of that went to the top 10% of recipients. 27% went to the top 1%. 80% of recipients received 9% of the subsidies. Now, additionally, it's common practice for the USDA to send farm subsidies not directly to the farmer, but to the banks to supposedly help. The federal government's there to help you, to help the farmers pay off their operating loans. The Environmental Working Group noted that from 2019 until 2021, the financial institution that received the most farm subsidies was the USDA. Because that's the agency that holds these farm loans. You just can't make this up. How could government exploit its own people this way? Aren't we a free country? Oh, yet adding to the home front scandal is the fact that the U.S. has so often helped other regimes weaponize food against their indigenous populations, even those flying communist banners. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin carried out a planned democide through artificially induced famine on the Ukraine in 1932 and 33. The New York Times' Walter Duranty downplayed the Holodomor, winning a Pulitzer Prize for his propaganda and leading to the Roosevelt administration's official recognition of the Soviet Union in 1933. Communist Chinese leader Mao Zedong imposed agricultural reforms on his people in the 1940s and 50s, transferring property rights to the state and thereby sparking, of course, widespread famine. Indispensable to his success was the backing of Truman's chief of staff, General George C. Marshall. Here's another example. Khmer Rouge leader Pol Pot, one of the most brutal dictators in history, acted with support of U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and U.S. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski. He herded the Cambodians to their death in disease-ridden labor camps, which became known as the killing fields. Again, think of 15-minute cities. Historians estimate around a quarter of Cambodia's population perished in the 1970s. Ethiopia's communist dictatorship under Mengistu forced collectivization of agriculture and resettlement programs that resulted in massive starvation in the 1980s. Credit goes to the $1 billion he received in aid from taxpayers in the US and other Western countries, which were channeled through UN lending institutions like the World Bank. Yet fact-checking Heidi Beirich wants us to believe that today's globalist bureaucrats are of a kinder and gentler ilk, that their Agenda 2030 is not a communist plan, but a non-binding feel-good guide to end such atrocities. So let's see what the authors of Agenda 2030 have to say about it. Don't take her word, don't take my word. Let's take their word. Now, the United States joined the UN in 1945, and soon after that, the organization offered a boogeyman that dwarfed interstate commerce as an excuse for stealing land and enslaving people, and that's sustainable development. The idea came from plotters at the Club of Rome, which is an international think tank founded in 1968, the same year that Malthusian Paul Ehrlich's book, The Population Bomb, debuted. Ehrlich compared humans to a cancer destroying Mother Earth and postulated that it must be cut out. He suggested a system of incentives and penalties by compulsion if voluntary methods fail. Now, the club's 1972 document, The Limits to Growth, took its cues from Ehrlich, describing a planet teetering on the edge of eco-Armageddon and warning that a supreme effort would be required on a scale and scope without precedent to organize more equitable distribution of wealth and income worldwide. Fewer than 4 months later, the United Nations launched its environment program. Founding director Maurice Strong, who was a Club of Rome adherent, though not a formal member, would later become an advisor to the World Economic Forum. He described his hopes for the World Economic Forum to journalist Daniel Wood in the May 1990 issue of West Magazine, relating the plot of a novel he wanted to write about a group of world leaders who set out to save the planet from environmental catastrophe by collapsing the economies of industrialized countries. The Club of Rome then showed its hand in its 1991 book, The First Global Revolution, writing, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention in natural processes. The real enemy then is humanity itself. And the following year, Strong served as the Secretary General of the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, the UN conference that produced Agenda 21. President George H.W. Bush signed on behalf of the United States, and in 2015, the document was updated with Agenda 2030 and its 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, we're not going to go through every single one of the goals just in the interest of time, but of particular interest to property owners and actually to any of us who want to eat are these. Sustainable Development Goal number 2, which calls for food security and sustainable agriculture, which is, of course, doublespeak for food scarcity and farming crises. The Netherlands and Sri Lanka provide recent tragic examples. Fertilizer and pesticide restrictions, enacted, of course, to save Mother Earth, have forced farmers out of business and left the populace to face hunger and starvation and hyperinflation. Sustainable Development Goal number 6 mandates sustainable management of water supplies, just as that planned for an arid county of West Texas, where U.S. taxpayers are footing the bill for Ireland-based, foreign-backed ET Fuels' $800 million green hydrogen project. It's estimated to use around 433,000 gallons of water per day. This is roughly equivalent to 2/3 of an Olympic-sized swimming pool in an area regularly plagued by drought. Though energy expert Robert Bryce points out that in the production process, you lose more energy than hydrogen contains, but it's all part of Agenda 2030's plan to decarbonize the energy industry. Farmers be damned. But Sustainable Development Goal number 11 aims to make human settlements more sustainable. This is code for 15-minute cities, which is a term that was introduced not by conspiracy theories, but immediately after the 2015 UN Climate Conference, where Agenda 2030 was introduced. The plan is to herd people into urban areas where everything we need is within a 15-minute walk or bicycle ride. However, travel outside your district will be restricted. Some cities are already transforming into these open-air prisons. Residents of Oxford, England are required to obtain a permit to cross 6 major roads that demarcate the city's zones. Another way they're plotting these out, you've heard of Elon Musk and his robo-taxis. They have something called geofencing in these areas. It's, of course, done with Wi-Fi and all of this. It keeps the cars, the driverless taxi system, the robo-taxis, within a certain parameter. Well, that parameter is also going to be used for CBDC, central bank digital currency, which is programmable currency, meaning your money won't work outside of your geofenced area. So thank Elon Musk for yet another boondoggle there. But now these open air prisons, these 15-minute cities, are also being built from the ground up. Example is the LEAP project, which is outside Lebanon, Indiana. It's funded by the state in cooperation with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which curiously has offices in Germany, Japan, South Korea, China, Israel, Italy, and the UK. President Biden boosted the 15-minute city agenda in 2021, only 6 days after his inauguration, issuing an executive order that called for conservation, which of course is doublespeak for government takeover, of at least 30% of our lands and waters by 2030 to tackle the climate crisis. Of course, we always have this moral imperative. This 30 by 30 initiative is part of the UN Convention on Biological Diversity, which aims to gobble up all this conserved land. And according to the CFR, the next step will be the ideal of conserving half of the planet by mid-century. That's also known as the 50 by 50 initiative. And here is what it's for. Sustainable Development Goal number 15, which favors green over reliable energy and endangered species over livestock. The goal is already threatening farmland across the US with eminent domain for boondoggles like solar, wind, carbon capture, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, you name it. And it's all backed by hefty government subsidies. And what will we eat as the crops diminish? Sustainable Development Goal number 12. Livestock herds will be culled in the name of conservation. Let them eat bugs. And that is the target of this Sustainable Development Goal: sustainable consumption and production. Don't take my word for it. It's on the United Nations website, which brags that insects are a food rich in protein with a smaller production carbon footprint than raising livestock. Now, these are only a few examples of how Agenda 2030 amounts to the latest chapter in this age-old land-grabbing textbook used by tyrants throughout history, but a crucial section of this modern chapter deals with implementation tactics. It's the phrase "think globally, act locally" that encapsulates their plans. The origin of this catchphrase is attributed to Scottish sociologist and biologist Patrick Geddes, who's considered a pioneer in urban planning, which he practiced both at home and during British colonial rule in India. Environmentalists sometimes refer to him as the father of sustainable development. He studied in college under Thomas Henry Huxley, who is known in history as Darwin's bulldog because he was such a close collaborator with and advocate for Charles Darwin. Geddes was greatly influenced by Darwin's evolutionary prattle, but on top of this, though he was raised a Presbyterian, as an adult he adopted pantheistic beliefs. It's basically a 19th century version of Mother Earth worship. So he didn't actually coin the phrase "think globally, act locally," but the environmentalists who did coin it in the 1970s look to him as their inspiration. The reason I'm highlighting him is because fast forward to the Bill Clinton administration. This was the administration right after George H.W. Bush had signed us on to the Rio Agenda 21 at Rio. And J. Gary Lawrence, who was an advisor to President Bill Clinton's Council on Sustainable Development, he detailed this future of local Agenda 21 in the new millennium. So it's that think global, act local, think globally, act locally mindset. So this was published in the September 1998 issue of the Millennium Papers. But, he warned, the name Local Agenda 21 in the United States would only bring out the many conspiracy-fixated groups and individuals. So his solution was we mask it. We call our processes something else, such as comprehensive planning, growth management, or smart growth. Now, UN-inspired comprehensive plans are now ubiquitous. New York City's One NYC 2050, Imagine Austin in Texas, Our LA 2040 in California, We Will Chicago, or just a few examples on the home front, while the London Plan, Metro Vancouver 2040, Plan Melbourne 2050, the Singapore Master Plan reveal that no corner of the globe is left untouched. Is this a global conspiracy? You bet it is. The LA fires, remember that? I guess everyone has already heard the slip made by LA County Public Works Director Mark Pestrella. He was giving a press conference to update on the Eaton fires, when he said, this is a quote, "My first piece of advice to you is this: let's take care of our mental and physical health first before we embark upon what is going to be a journey to rebuild these communities back and rebuild them better than they were when we started this fire." Now, Mark Pestrella has served on the board of directors of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. And here's what Our LA 2040 says. It says, quote, "The city of Los Angeles is geographically divided into 35 community plans and 2 special purpose districts, Port of Los Angeles and Los Angeles World Airports, which together depict a range of allowable land uses and zoning for each parcel in that city." They've already divided it into 15-minute cities. In other words, these tentacles entwine small towns and rural areas too. The city of Durango, Colorado, has a comprehensive plan that's filled with all the telling catchphrases such as socioeconomic diversity and sustainable behavior and the unsustainability of transportation based on single occupancy vehicles. That's a scary one. There's another tragic thing. Oxedo County, New York, which is home of the National Baseball Hall of Fame. What could be more American, than baseball? It offers a comprehensive plan sample and tool, downloadable from its website. And if you look into what your local city council or county commission has adopted, you are going to find these similar footprints. They have enacted these in every jurisdiction across the United States in the city and county levels. It is likely that your city and county commissioners are completely innocent. They're unaware of the source of these things because all these international organizations, these NGOs come in with all the glossy print and they already have everything planned out. And of course you want sustainable development and for your future generations in your locality. And they sign on the dotted line without looking into it, without vetting it, without finding out, oh, this is actually a Trojan horse, a wolf in sheep's clothing. So the best thing to do is plan to collaborate with, rather than confront, your city and county commissioners to make them aware of these globalist traps. And that's the way to get out of it. Be a trusted advisor. And you will certainly not be acting alone. To save the country from such conspiratorial plots, U.S. businessman and Robert Welch founded the John Birch Society in 1958. He too realized that local action is key to victory, and he formed his grassroots organization to educate patriots nationwide so they could combat the agenda on their home turf, which is a much more achievable objective than combating faceless, faraway bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. His concept was similar to the committees of correspondence, formed to establish communication among the American colonies as they strove for independence from their tyrannical oppressor. So Agenda 2030 amounts to our generation's 1776 moment. JBS offers the resources that freedom-loving patriots need to expose the nefarious crimes and to bring about less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world, which is the slogan of the John Birch Society. So with that, we will end the presentation, and I want to thank everyone for their attention. And I see that we have a question in the Q&A, but if you have any questions, please put them there. We have an anonymous attendant. CJ, I'm going to let you take over from here because I know John wanted to do a presentation too. How about that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was excellent and at the same time unbelievable. But you showed a lot of proof, and it is very shocking, I know, to a lot of people. But folks, we're going to do something that you're not used to. You're used to getting presented with the problem. You're used to that. But are you used to solutions after getting presented with a problem? The man I'm bringing on today has been with the John Birch Society from the beginning stages of it. And he has a history of solving the problems. And he has a 7-minute solution that I want you to please listen to. His name is John Selk, and he's a legend. Thank you so much, John, for sharing this with us.
Oh, CJ, I'm so glad to be here. And everyone, I'm delighted to give you a 7-minute segment of a full-length solution seminar that we did for 50 minutes just 3 weeks ago. We're going to introduce you very quickly with Wendy Boden's assistant back in Appleton of our tools. The first one we want to see, Wendy, is the leading intelligence digest in the world. Some of you know that it is the New American, founded in 1985. The New American, without a doubt, is the preeminent source of suppressed information that you're not intended to see. Here is a memory I have, it's vivid. A lastingly successful falsehood is destroyed in direct proportion to the amount of the other side that leaks out to an unwilling public. That's our challenge. It's our opportunity. The New American sends reporters and investigators around the world when these plotters and globalists are hatching and implementing their plans. No one else does that, friends. There are happily some very good conservative groups that have cropped up in my 60 years. But we're the preeminent ones in doing the investigation. Our mission? Wake the town and tell the people, but then tell the people what to do about it. And no one does that. Liken it to taking people across a vast, dangerous canyon. That's the problem facing us. We are the organization that take people from one side when they're in deep danger, takes them across a long bridge to the solution side. That's our mission tonight. The New American comes to you in 3 formats. Number 1 is our monthly magazine that you're staring at here. It is loaded with information that will be unique to you before you spread it out. But since our job is to wake the town, we have 2 other formats for you. It's wonderful. We have just initiated a weekly update on breaking news and suppressed information that's called, and Wendy, if we can hopefully show them a picture of what arrives in their emails every Friday afternoon at about 2 o'clock here in California time. This contains very brief articles by the leading luminaries of the New American, people obviously like Rebecca or Alex Newman or my friend Bill Jasper or Steve Bonta and others. So you can get it all in beginning form, often breaking news on Friday afternoons if you're a Birch member or a subscriber to the New American. The magazine itself costs only $49 a year delivered digitally, or $59 for old fossils like me who like to stack them and refer to them print version. So you now have two formats, but not to be outdone. We also bring these luminaries to your town and mine live and able to be questioned, like will happen with Rebecca in a few moments. Live webinars with these great experts brought to you to do what? To equip you to share this with good people and at very, very low cost. But let's progress quickly, Wendy, to another dynamite weapon in this battle. This is important. Wendy, thank you for this. This is something entirely new. On November 13th, our staff at the New American and the John Birch Society will give you a how-to briefing. How to use our next tool, the Freedom Index, and our scorecards. And she will show you what a scorecard looks like. Our congressional scorecard shows the people who spend your money in Washington. On the left, you'll see X's, showing whether the measure that was voted upon was constitutional or not, and will also show you the average cost per household. This is the accountability that spendaholic congressmen dread. They don't like the average American to realize how much this all costs. So this is accountability. But I want to point out, this is not a rating service where we mark up some people unfavorably and attack people. This is not a rating service. Friends, this is a reporting service. If you and I were to work in most winnable congressional districts that are not rotted to the core, 50,000 of these would change the mind of the congressman for voting in the spendaholic column, the red X's, and cross the aisle and vote for constitutional measures. This particular measure was used in 1994 by conservative people in the state of Washington to unseat the Speaker of the House because he wouldn't listen to them. He scorned them at town hall meetings until he became an ex-congressman. We'd love to have lots of time to take you through tonight to your congressional district, but come on November 13th and learn from experts how to use this wonderful tool. Now you have a question, don't you? You're wondering, how on earth would those Birchers coordinate this vast field operation? We have two tools. The first one, and Wendy is going to show you our monthly action plan, updated every month. It's called the Bulletin of the John Birch Society. The first part will analyze where the other side is vulnerable, and they are extremely vulnerable in their bold actions. Then we outline our projects to stop them and to start restoring freedom. But along with this bulletin, we actually have field executives called coordinators who exist for one purpose only. It's to help you to be effective in waking the town and telling the people. Because, as my mentor and former employer, Robert Welch, used to say, we mean business every step of the way. And then Wendy's going to show you how to implement personally. We have two categories of non-Birch members here. Some of you are probably way overdue in being offered membership in our society. So if you look, you will see the phone number. You can write it down of our office in Appleton, Wisconsin. Or you can join us electrically by going to jbs.org and filling out an application. But for you newbies, I want to make an offer as I close tonight. If some of you are kind of overwhelmed, this is all new to you, bless you. But if you call that phone number, 920-644-7200, 749-3780 and tell one of the young ladies on the switchboard, John Selk suggested that I call you to ask for a free product demonstration. One of our field coordinators will make an appointment to sit with you and rather slowly take you through what's available within your time frame and availability. And then you'll be helping us to save our families, our country, and friends, as Rebecca documented, a whole civilization. CJ, thanks for letting me be with our friends tonight. Thank you, Rebecca. We'll see you again.
Thank you so much for that, John. That was excellent. And it's because of voices like yours and Rebecca's and everyone here that America is still free. I know in certain sections it's getting worse and worse. However, there are sections that are becoming more and more free because of you. So let's go ahead and get to these questions. I know Rebecca has probably been studying them. And if you want, Rebecca, you can start with the first one. Let me go ahead and read it here for you for the
BJ,
anonymous.
actually, I wanted to start with the second one first.
Okay,
because
let's do it.
it's actually a very boots on the ground kind of a question. The
Mm,
fighting at the township level and the county level. This person's asking about their counties are selling off land to warehouses, which is, just, I mean, anything that they're using valuable farmlands, not for farm purposes, that's a land grab, right? And they say, we need answers for that fight. I'll tell you what, you have to go look at your particular jurisdiction. You have to see what the regulations are, because over time, and as my presentation showed you, this has been building up over time. They know what they're doing. They're planning things. I'll give you an example. In Wisconsin, they're right now, I was up there giving a presentation in August about solar and wind. They're fighting those right now more than carbon capture or anything. That's what's facing them. A few years ago, their state legislature passed a law that said if there is an energy facility above a certain capacity factor rating, like two megawatts, I don't know what the actual number is, but if it's above that quota, above that number, which most are, then the state has supervisory authority over the siting of that facility. Over the state has total say so. Took all the control away from the counties and put it at the state level. So you have to find out what's been going on in your state, and then you have to do some research. Just do some initial research. Get in with your county. Get to know your county commissioners and your city planners. Get to know them on a really good basis and become a trusted advisor for them. Some are going to slam their doors in your face, but you're going to find one or two that are good. And if you can't find any, run for office yourself. You can run for a local office. That's how South Dakota turned it around the carbon capture pipelines. There were so many farmers and ranchers that stood up and said, I've got to run. I've got to save my state. I've got to save my farm for my son, for my daughter, for future generations. And that's what they did. So find out what's going on in your locality, exactly how the laws play out, and expose some of this stuff. Get some of those bad laws overturned. In South Dakota and Iowa several years ago, the state legislature passed a law that if you have a pipeline, an active application before the State Utilities Commission to put in a pipeline, just an application, it doesn't have to be approved yet. You can go on any private landowner's land and survey without that landowner's permission. That was a law passed. That's ridiculous. Those type laws need to be overturned. So I mean, it's a long, slow process. There's no quick fix to it, but that's what I would say. Find out what's going on in your state and your locality. Now, CJ, I want to back up to the first question because it has a little bit more of a theoretical tone to it. So thank you for the compliment about the presentation. This person says, concerning the loss of property and or values thereof, how integral is the removal of most, if not all, of American dams under the guise of improving fish passage, which the fish have never complained about the dams, when measuring Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, while eroding American wealth? Okay, so that's part one. So yes, this is all this. They want to take away our access to affordable, reliable, efficient energy, because I think it was Kissinger who said, or was quoted, his staffer was quoted as saying that he said, if you want to control people, you control the food. If you want to control nations, you control the energy. If you want to control the world, you control the money supply. So that's what they're wanting to do. They're wanting to bring us back to kind of a Middle Ages as far as, energy goes. We have the energy that we need now if the federal government would get out of the business of regulating things that the founding fathers and the Constitution never gave authority to do, to be involved in. So that's what we've got to do. We've got to get our elected representatives, especially those in Washington, D.C., educated. That is why the John Birch Society was founded, for educational purposes. Educate those elected leaders so they know, hey, all of this stuff is unconstitutional. There's not one agency in the federal bureaucracy that is constitutionally based. Now, the second part of that question, and what can we do to throw sand in the gears of NGOs like American Rivers, which is headquartered in Washington, D.C. I looked that up while John was giving his presentation. I was familiar with the name, but I wanted to check in on it. And there's a great website called influencewatch.org. If you've never used it, it's a wonderful website that reports on things that, rather objectively too. It'll just say, where the funding comes from for places like this. I will read off of that website right now. It says, since its founding in 1973, American Rivers has received $1.2 billion in federal grants to fund all these very leftist projects that they're trying to shut down dams, because of course, hydropower, you want to talk about a carbon-free energy source? What could be more carbon-free than hydropower? So they're after our electricity. Yes, all of these things need to be shut down. And the way to shut them down is in the federal subsidies. Not one federal subsidy is constitutional. There is absolutely not one. It's very rare in life that you can make an absolute statement like that. And this, I'd stake my reputation on it. There's nothing constitutionally authorized, none of these type measures. And the reason I can say that so absolutely is because of the 9th and 10th Amendments to the Constitution, which say, in other words, if we forgot anything here, the federal government can't do that either. So, the federal government was basically founded to provide for our national defense and pretty much not anything else. There are too many loopholes in it. And that's why they added the Bill of Rights. So the Bill of Rights was supposed to be the stopgap for all those little loopholes. We need to educate our congressmen. So, yes, anonymous attendee says home rule. Let me see. Oh, we have quite a few other questions. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how many were piling up here. It's good for people. Kathy Lynch says it's good for people to grow their own, but not everyone can do that. So how do you protect all the people from a purposeful government starvation of their people? That's a great question. And that's not going to be something that's, again, a quick fix. I would say just all of the things I've been talking about, get involved, run for office if you have to, overturn these things. Educate your county sheriffs too. The county sheriff has a lot of power to keep federal encroachments from coming onto his turf. So that's another thing. You can find a lot of information about that on our websites at jbs.org and at thenewamerican.com. You can also look into Sheriff Mack and the Constitutional Sheriffs movement. So Stig Medby says, how do we control Chinese agricultural espionage impacting our food supply? Again, that's something Congress needs to turn that around absolutely right now and do. Linda Rhodes, can you tell the viewing audience about stopping the flow of the federal grant money? Again, yeah, all this federal grant money, it's Congress holds the key to that. So we need to clean house and send it too, right? We need to get the bad guys out of there who have control files and, send Mr. Smith to Washington and get people in there who are going to look out for the interests of the average Joe American rather than the Chinese influence and all this stuff. Yes, very dangerous to state sovereignty. Again, that's what I would appeal to the Bill of Rights. It was, and I'm not bashing our Constitution to say that at first none of the states agreed to the Constitution at all. They weren't going to enact it. They weren't going to sign it. And that's how we came up with the Bill of Rights. So we need to really focus on that and enforce that Bill of Rights and get our congressmen to do that too. There's nothing stopping anybody from running for office too, especially at a local level. You can do it. You can turn things around. They did in South Dakota. We've been talking about that at thenewamerican.com for a long time now. So kudos to them. If they can do it, you can too. So I think that's all the questions, CJ. Do you want to close with a prayer or anything?
You know what? Brian has, I think, a very important question. He said that
Oh,
there were actually, what role do the private equity and hedge funds play in this?
oh yeah. Well, of course they play a huge role, and of course there's not much you can do about, for private funding, but a lot of it, like, look at Elon Musk. Everybody says, oh, he's this fantastic entrepreneur. You wouldn't know his name if it weren't for federal subsidies. So we need to get you pull out those federal subsidies, and you're really going to bring a lot of things like this down to their knees. You're going to have a much more controllable opposition without all that. Ben Schumer did ask a question too. He said, can you say again the keywords to search for in municipal and county government records? It's smart planning or smart growth. The real one to look for is comprehensive plans. That's the most common one, I think. But you will also see anything like smart. I tell you what, once you find words like sustainable development and sustainability, and it's always sustainable, you're going to see that word over and over and over again. So those are the little catchphrases that tell you, okay, this came from Agenda 2030. Nobody talks like that. Nobody else talks like that. And the fact that you cannot go to the remotest village in Africa and not find that terminology used, that shows that this is a global conspiracy. We need to not be frightened of using the word conspiracy, especially, I'm not happy that COVID happened, but it's an ill wind that blows no good. At least people now aren't frightened. They're like, oh, those conspiracy theorists, they were onto something. Yeah, we have been for a long time. We were right. We were so right. And that's not a happy thing, but we're not happy to have to be right. It's not like nanny boo boo or anything like that, but so that's it. It's comprehensive planning or smart growth, smart planning, something like that. You're going to find that at your local level.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. That's great. To go to the next one. Can you say, okay, so that's the one you actually addressed already. All right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, you all, for attending this. This has been very eye-opening. Rebecca, I thank you for your time. Thank you so much, everyone. I do want to remind you of what Rebecca said earlier. And I caught on to that and I was like, wow, there's hope. And that was with the wheat. They were doing just heinous things with gathering up people who were trying to just feed their families. And it stopped because of public outcry. Do you remember when you said that?
Yep.
Rebecca, it stopped because of public outcry. Okay. It stopped, also known as because you all said something. The public said something. So, how much more effective would you be if you coordinated together? If you reached out to your neighbor, right? If you reached out to a bircher and said, hey, what are you guys doing about this? Because if you do nothing, Rebecca, you actually shared about Holodomor. Oh my goodness, that was very sad. I remember learning about that. It wasn't from school, but I had to learn on my own, and it was extremely sad. But the tyranny they want to bring up on us is preventable. We just got to have a sufficient understanding. A sufficient understanding, and we can do that. All right. And John, please go ahead and share what you would like to
this
share.
leads to mind. This is part of Rebecca's hopefulness, as she described. How many nice people would have any sympathy with the monsters who would take away our future? The public is on our side to the extent that we share the truth, and we can do it in a nice way. My wife and I were just talking about the marvelous way in which Rebecca communicates. No cheap shots, no personal attacks. The facts are enough. But what everyone in this wonderful group tonight could do is to take Wendy up on the offer she just put in the help box, saying that all the registered participants are going to receive a link in the next 24 hours, giving us access to the recording so we can do what? So we can share it with new people. Is everybody with me on that? What do you think of that, Rebecca? For all of your labors and your great research, everybody here tonight has power to do something great.
Thank you, John. Yeah, absolutely. And if you want a printed version of this presentation, we printed it in. It was one of the February issues. I'm putting Wendy on the spot here because I should have had her get a copy just so you could see the cover. It was one of the February 2025 issues, though, and I think it's called Engineering the Price of Food. I wanted to call it Hunger Games because that's what I actually named this present, because it is. It's a bunch of Hunger Games throughout this games governments play on people using hunger as a means of control. And so, but anyway, they changed it to Engineering the Price of Food. It was back when the bird flu had hit and the egg prices were going so high. And, curiously, that bird flu didn't affect the meat chickens. The chicken meat didn't go way up. It was the eggs. So isn't that interesting how fickle a flu can be? But anyway, so if you get a hold of a copy of that magazine, again, it was back when, before we went to the monthly format. It was back when we were still doing 2 issues a month rather than just 1. So it's one of those 2. And it's got a ton of information, all this information plus more, because I did a deep dive on the Holodomor and all those other Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge and the killing fields and all that. So anyway, there you go. Anybody who wants it can find it there. And at thenewamerican.com, you can find that too.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for your time and an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, John. Of course, we want you back. I want you back on another webinar, as well as yourself, Rebecca. There was actually farmers that reached out to me and said, man, we need more. We need more. And so
Yeah.
I'm thankful for that. I'm looking forward to more. So let's go ahead and close in prayer, and then we'll go ahead and say goodbye. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for another presentation, Lord. Father, to present not only the problem, but also the solution, Lord. We ask that you be with us in wisdom as we go forth to some of the powers that shouldn't be, and share with them the truth, share with them the knowledge, because education is our total strategy and truth is our only weapon. In Jesus' name. Thank you so much again, everyone, for attending. And thank you, Rebecca and John. We'll see you
Thank you,
later.
CJ. Good night, everyone.
Wow.
Wow.